Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Tonight we're traveling to the frozen edges of the world with 8 true Appalachian Mountains horror stories. Encounters that prove the real danger isn't always the cold, it's what's hiding in the dark. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, let's step into the Appalachian Mountains together. Story 1. Earlier this year, I shared a story about a paranormal event from my youth, which was featured on a podcast. Since that story aired, I've felt a persistent unease. It's as if sharing the experience reawakened something. I've been catching fleeting movements in my peripheral vision, hearing faint whispers just on the edge of hearing, and feeling that unnerving sensation of breath on my neck that makes your skin crawl. A constant feeling of being followed. As I write this, it has been about 8 weeks since the most recent incident. It was a Friday evening. My fiancé and I, after finishing our work shifts and dropping our child off with the grandparents, decided to spend a few hours doing DoorDash deliveries. It had been a successful night. We'd earned over $100 in just a couple of hours. The evening felt normal, solid. There were no whispers, no unsettling feelings. I had almost managed to push the lingering dread to the back of my mind. Almost. We arrived home around 9:45 p.m., just as a storm began to roll in. The forecast had called for scattered thunderstorms. A perfect backdrop for something unsettling, wasn't it? At about 10:38 p.m., I got up to use the restroom. An episode of South Park was on the TV. As I walked toward the bathroom, the lights in the house began to flicker. Realizing I'd left my phone on the couch, I turned back to get it, just in case the power went out completely. I was making my way down the hallway, just past my daughter's room, when a brilliant flash of lightning lit up the house, followed instantly by a deafening crack of thunder that seemed to shake the foundation. The lights went out. A moment later, the backup generator kicked in, restoring power. Then I heard my fiancé scream. I sprinted back to the living room to see what was wrong. And that's when I saw it. Standing in our front doorway was the shadow. The same shadow entity I had encountered as a child. It wore the familiar dark fedora and held a cane. Its piercing red eyes were just as I remembered. But this time, my fiancé saw it too. Up until this moment, I had harbored a belief that paranormal entities were tied to specific individuals. I couldn't have been more mistaken. Every instinct screamed at me to get my fiancé out of there. But I was paralyzed, frozen by the sight of this figure from my past. My history had caught up with me, and I had a choice to make: fight or flee. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to find my voice. "What do you want? Why are you back?" I waited, but it just stood there, its burning red eyes staring into my soul. I repeated my question, my voice louder this time, demanding an answer. The shadow raised its cane and pointed it directly at me. A silent, chilling response. You, my fiancé, breaking free from her shock, tried to run. The shadow lifted its cane again, and with a thunderous bang, every door in the house slammed shut. My mind raced, searching for a weapon. I remembered the bug assault rifle I kept in the kitchen. It was on the counter, within reach. I lunged for it and pumped the action. The shadow moved toward me, faster than I could track, its hand reaching for my throat. I squeezed the trigger. The blast of salt hit it square in the chest. A high-pitched shriek echoed through the room, and then the figure vanished. I scanned the room, expecting it to reappear, but there was only silence. I found my fiancé huddled under her vanity in the adjacent den. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Do I look okay?" she cried. "What was that?" I took a deep breath. It's a long story. I've dealt with things like this my whole life, but this is the first time anyone else has seen it. She looked at me, her face pale. "This is insane! I've never experienced anything like this." She buried her face in her hands and began to sob. I held her, offering what little comfort I could, my mind reeling with questions. What did this entity want from me? Was this curse going to cost me the person I loved? A few days later, I spoke with my psychiatrist, who put me in touch with a parapsychologist. The specialist suggested I might be the target of a possession attempt. Following that consultation, I reached out to various spiritual advisors. They performed a cleansing ritual on my home and provided me with protective items. I have since embraced a more spiritual approach to combating this entity. For now, things have been quiet. There have been no further appearances of the shadow. Whether I have seen the last of it, only time will tell. But I know with certainty that I could live the rest of my life without ever seeing it again. Next story. I still can't explain what I saw that day, but the image is permanently etched in my mind. I was 18 at the time. It was the opening day of rifle season in Wisconsin, and an early snow had fallen the day before. When I reached my hunting spot, I found my blind had collapsed under the weight of the snow. Annoyed, I set about fixing it. But as I worked, a strange feeling washed over me. The distinct sensation of being watched. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia. After I got the blind propped back up, I heard footsteps in the snow behind me. I froze. Everything went silent. I slowly turned and saw two bucks standing there, staring at me. It was strange. They were just standing there, not moving at all. I couldn't even see their breath in the cold air. As I watched them, I slowly began to slide my rifle from my shoulder. Just then, the sounds of the forest returned, and the two deer calmly walked away. I had a feeling the rest of the day was going to be odd. As the day progressed, the feeling of being watched persisted. It seemed to be coming from the direction I had walked in from. Around 3 p.m., I heard a coyote call, but it sounded wrong, distorted. It was as if something was trying to mimic the sound from memory and failing. As the sun began to set, I packed my gear and started the walk back to my car. The route required me to cross a few fences. As I approached the last fence, the intense feeling of being watched returned. I stopped dead in my tracks and scanned my surroundings. And then I saw it. Perched on a fence post was some kind of person or humanoid creature. It was hunched over, with long, thin arms. It looked emaciated. Its body was covered in short, patchy hair, and its skin was a pale gray. As I stared, I saw that its eyes were deep black voids. It had pointed ears, but I couldn't discern a mouth. All I could do was stand there and stare at this thing, which was staring right back at me. I slowly took a couple of steps toward it. On my second step, it straightened up quickly. I froze and made the foolish decision to call out, "Hello?" The creature tilted its head, like a curious dog. Then, it hopped down from the fence post and stood upright. It was about 6 feet tall. Its hands were almost claw-like, with long, sharp nails. Then, it did something that made my blood run cold. It spoke. It mimicked my hello, but the sound was distorted. Just like the coyote call I'd heard earlier. I tried to raise my rifle, but my hands were shaking so violently that it slipped from my grasp and fell to the snow-covered ground. When I looked back up to where the creature had been, it was gone. The shock of it all snapped me back to reality. I grabbed my rifle and bolted up the hill, scrambling over the fence where the creature had been. I finally reached my car, threw my gear in, and sped away. I drove to a bar in town where my uncle and brother had said they would be. When I walked in, they asked if I'd seen a ghost, commenting on how pale I was. I lied and said I was just cold. I never told them what I saw. To this day, whenever I go hunting, a part of me is terrified I'll encounter it again. Next story. I was 17 when it happened. My Uncle Grant owns several off-grid cabins in the Kentucky Appalachians. Every fall, he offers them to family for a weekend getaway. No phones, no internet, just propane and firewood. My cousin B and I, both the same age, decided to take him up on his offer. We ended up in a weathered log cabin on stilts. The bedding smelled of old smoke and damp wool, and the generator was temperamental. Our first day was idyllic. We explored an old game trail, sketched moss patterns, and built strange rock stacks. That night, by the fire, we traded ghost stories. The next morning, we found a rope tied tightly between 2 trees behind the cabin. Each tree had 3 notches carved into it, like tally marks. It was strange, but we dismissed it as some kind of survey marker or trail line, even though there were none on the map. That night, I was woken by a steady, rhythmic creaking sound, like something swinging. I looked out the window but saw nothing. The following morning, we returned to the rope. It had been cleanly cut. Later that day, while hiking a ridge, we saw it, something bounding downhill through the trees. It moved unnaturally fast, its limbs disproportionate. It wasn't a deer or a bear. It wasn't human. We didn't wait to get a better look. We turned and headed back to the cabin. That evening, there was a sharp knock at the kitchen window. I looked out but saw nothing. But on the porch railing was a foot-long coil of rope, perfectly wound. It wasn't ours. We barricaded the door and stayed up all night, terrified. The next morning, I insisted we leave. The trail seemed familiar at first, but then we realized we were walking in circles. We passed the same blue tarp snagged on a branch 3 times. We marked a tree with an X and passed it again 10 minutes later. An oppressive silence fell over the forest. Then we saw the rope again, stretched between 2 trees. This time, a dead rabbit, split open, hung from its center. We ran. The forest seemed to warp around us, the trees leaning in, the path twisting. Then we saw the cabin again. The front door, which we had locked and barricaded, was wide open. Inside, things were wrong. My knives were missing, the kettle was gone, and B's sketchbook had vanished. Symbols were smeared in mud on the fireplace wall. We didn't stay to investigate. "Forget the trail," I said. "We're following the creek straight out." We scrambled through the mud and dense undergrowth, eventually breaking through the tree line and finding a ranger shed and a gravel road. We didn't feel safe until we were miles away. The next day, my uncle called. He said the cabin was a wreck. The back door had been tied shut with twine, and something dead was hanging from the outhouse handle. I told him we hadn't done any of that. He paused, then said, "Well, I guess I'll take that cabin off the rental list." We haven't spoken of it since. Next story. My cousin was supposed to join me. We had planned this short hiking trip for weeks, a simple 2-night escape. But on the morning of our departure, he bailed, claiming his dad needed help with some fencing. It sounded like a flimsy excuse, a classic case of cold feet about the woods. I didn't press him. I just packed my car and left alone. I'm comfortable with solo hiking, having done a few day trips and 1 overnight trip by myself. But this trail was different. It was remote, with no recent reports, no cell service, and no ranger presence. I arrived at the trailhead later than I had intended, around 5:42 p.m. The trail was marked by a sagging wooden sign that simply read, "Trail." The trees quickly enveloped me. The first mile was a steady, steep climb. The canopy thickened quickly, and darkness began to fall faster than I had anticipated. By mile 3, I had to turn on my headlamp. The trail leveled off onto a ridge, and I found a small clearing with a half-circle of fire-blackened rocks, a campsite that hadn't been used in a long time. It felt quiet, undisturbed. I set up my camp, a tarp between 2 trees and a small fire. As I was eating my stew, something landed on the ground near my boot with a soft thud. It was a smooth, round, pale rock, about the size of a golf ball. I hadn't moved. It hadn't rolled from anywhere. There were no overhanging branches it could have fallen from. It had been thrown. I froze, my brain struggling to process this. I slowly swept the beam of my headlamp through the surrounding woods, but it only illuminated about 15 feet, not nearly enough to see what was out there. After 15 minutes of tense silence, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a squirrel had dislodged it from higher up, but it didn't feel right. I banked the fire and crawled under my tarp, my knife unsheathed in my hand. I eventually fell asleep, but I was jolted awake later in the night. It wasn't a sound that woke me. It was a feeling, a change in the atmosphere, like the pressure drop before a storm. Then I heard it, the shuffling of leaves, a few steps, then a pause. It wasn't close, but it was there. I slowly reached for my flashlight, but my hand met empty ground. I sat up, my heart pounding. My flashlight, which I had placed right next to me, was now 12 feet away, lying in the leaves, its beam pointing into the woods. Someone had moved it. I pulled on my boots and crouched by the dying fire, my knife clutched tightly. I considered hiking out in the dark, But with my flashlight tampered with and someone creeping around, I decided it was safer to stay put. For the rest of the night, I heard intermittent sounds from the woods, pacing, a low dragging sound against bark. Just before dawn, the footsteps came closer, slow, deliberate steps, stopping just behind a tree at the edge of my campsite. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel a presence there. I sat frozen for what felt like hours, not moving, barely breathing, as the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. The forest came back to life with the sound of birds. I didn't waste any time. I packed my gear and started back down the trail without a backward glance. Every snap of a twig made me jump. When I saw my car, I broke into a sprint. I fumbled with the keys, got in, locked the doors, and sped away. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station miles away. The cashier asked if I'd been camping. I just nodded, unable to speak. Next story. My name is Kay, and I want to tell you about something that happened in 2013, an event that is still crystal clear in my memory. I was born in a small, rural town, where everyone knew one another and the houses were clustered closely together. A single long road ran through the center of our community. In those days, we had no mobile phones or cars. Life was simple. Children played outside until dusk, and the elders would share stories with us. Tales of El Cadejo, the headless horseman, the creaking cart, and others. But the story that always stayed with me was that of La Ciguanaba, a legend from El Salvador. She is a figure of fear for many of us. The legend says she was once a beautiful woman who, after discovering her husband's infidelity, murdered him and his lover in a fit of rage. She then abandoned her own child, who was later found lifeless. Her spirit, now cursed and restless, is said to roam the streets, luring unfaithful and intoxicated men to their doom. Now, for my story. One afternoon, I went to visit my aunt, who lived about 6 or 7 houses down the road. We were very close, more like sisters than aunt and niece. I was living with my grandmother at the time, as my parents were in the United States. My aunt's house was a lovely home, nestled among trees. It was L-shaped, and in the courtyard stood a massive ceiba tree. I was always a little intimidated by that tree. Its size was immense. That day, I had left for my aunt's house around 1 p.m. My grandmother had warned me to be back before sunset, as there was a lot of violence in the country at the time. Of course, I lost track of time. By the time I noticed, the sun had already disappeared behind the hills. I knew my grandmother would be furious. As I was about to say goodbye to my aunt, I heard my name being called. My name is quite unique, and not many people know how to pronounce it correctly, so I was surprised and assumed it was my aunt. I ignored it and went to find her. When I did, I asked if she had called me. She gave me a puzzled look and said she hadn't. I explained that I needed to head home. She urged me to spend the night, as it was already quite dark. I insisted I couldn't, worried about my grandmother. My aunt relented and went inside to find a flashlight for me to use on my walk home. While I waited for her, I stood at the front of the house, looking at the giant tree and worrying about the trouble I was in. Then, I heard my name called again. Thinking it must be my aunt this time, I answered, "Yes." There was no response. A moment later, I heard my name for a third time. I looked around, but saw no one. Then my eyes were drawn to the tree. Peeking from behind the massive trunk was a woman. She was smiling, and her long black hair descended over her pale skin. I stared, frozen with terror. Then, I broke from my trance and ran to find my aunt. I collided with her husband, who asked me what was wrong. I told him I had seen someone behind the tree. He tried to calm me, saying I must have imagined it. I insisted I hadn't. He grabbed his flashlight and said he would go look. I followed, but stayed close to the door. When he reached the tree, he called back that no one was there. He suggested that my fear of walking home in the dark had caused me to see things. Perhaps he was right, but I can still so vividly recall the woman's unsettling smile and her long, dark hair. After that, my aunt and her husband walked me home. Not long after that incident, I visited them again, and the giant tree was gone. My aunt explained that it had been too close to the house and posed a danger during storms. I don't entirely believe that was the only reason. I suspect they both saw something that night. Next story. She and I had this unspoken rivalry, a constant push to outdo each other in recklessness. Our teenage years were a blur of late-night drives to nowhere, questionable parties, and meals sourced from gas station shelves. But the trip we took into the Blue Ridge backcountry stands out, not just for its foolishness, which it certainly was, but because I still have no explanation for what we experienced. Lark had just gotten her driver's license back after a prolonged legal battle and the messy fallout from a breakup that had left her emotionally gutted. I think she needed to prove something to herself, to feel competent again. I just needed to get away from Charleston. I was tired of campus life, the traffic, and my roommate's endless arguments. We didn't plan much, a fact that now seems reckless. We used an old paper map of her father's, probably from the 1980s, which had a loop trail marked near the Carolina-Georgia border. He'd hiked it in college, he said. The trail cut through old, overgrown coal land, completely off-grid. No cell service, no ranger station. It sounded like the perfect place to vanish for a few days. We set out around 9 a.m. and reached the end of the road by noon, and I mean the absolute end. The road simply gave up halfway up a ridge. We parked next to a dilapidated sedan that had clearly been there for some time. Its windows were grimy, it had no license plates, and its tires were partially sunken into the gravel. "That's unsettling," I remarked. Lark just shrugged. "Probably hunters," she replied. We climbed over a rusted gate and began our hike. The heat was immediate and oppressive. Within minutes, my shirt was soaked with sweat. The trail was barely visible, a faint path through dense, overgrown brush. We followed the northern fork toward a dry creek bed. There were no signs or markers, just this narrow track winding around a ridge and dipping into a grove of trees, where the canopy blocked out most of the light. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. First, the birds fell silent, then the insects. Soon, even the sound of our own footsteps seemed too loud. This wasn't a peaceful silence. It felt artificial, as if the forest was holding its breath. "Do you feel that?" I asked. "Something feels off." Lark didn't answer but slowed her pace, scanning the trees behind us before quickening her step. It was the first time I'd seen her tense. Then we heard it, a single set of footsteps behind us. A distinct crunch, a drag, then a stop. We both halted and turned, expecting to see another hiker. But the trail behind us was empty. We waited. The forest was unnervingly still. We resumed walking, more slowly this time. I counted my steps. After about 10, we heard it again. Crunch, drag, stop. It was closer, heavier. It didn't sound like someone trying to be stealthy. "Someone is following us," I whispered. Lark gave me a tense, tight-jawed nod. The trail curved uphill. To our left was a ridge with the remains of a collapsed shelter leaning against a large rock formation. A thick, stiff rope hung from a bolt in the rock face. "Up there," I said, pointing. "Now." We scrambled up the rope. From our vantage point behind the ruined shelter, we had a clear view of the trail below. Lark suddenly stiffened. A man had emerged from the trees, about 20 feet from where we had just been standing. He wasn't dressed for hiking. He wore jeans, scuffed boots, and a tan jacket. He had no gear. He looked completely out of place. He just stood there, his head slightly tilted, his eyes fixed on our position. "We don't want any trouble," I called down. "We're just passing through." He didn't react. Then, without breaking eye contact, he began to walk toward the base of the rock. He reached the rope and took hold of it. I grabbed a sharp-edged piece of shale. "Lark, find something heavy," I said quietly. "If he comes up, we don't let him reach the top." She found 2 large rocks. We crouched, waiting. He just stood there, staring up at us. After what felt like an eternity, he blinked, released the rope, and stepped back. Then, he turned and vanished into the trees, as silently as he had appeared. We waited for 20 minutes. Nothing. Then we heard a single, sharp crack of a branch snapping to our left. "We're going," I whispered. We descended the rope and moved quickly, our ears straining for any sound. Slowly, the normal sounds of the forest returned. By the time we got back to the car, everything seemed normal again. Before getting in, I glanced back at the trailhead. I thought I saw a flicker of movement just beyond the trees, but it could have been the wind. We drove away in silence, not speaking until we were back in cell range. I tried to find the trail on my phone's map. The road we had taken wasn't even on it. That was the last time I ever went into the wilderness without leaving a detailed plan with someone. Next story. The pickup point was deep in the Virginia Appalachians, far beyond any marked trails or maintained roads. The assignment was stark: a set of coordinates on matte paper, a grainy photograph, and a single typed line. Target is male, 19 years old. Use carfentanil. Do not underestimate. That last line stuck with me. It was an unusual warning in our line of work, which typically emphasized discretion and timing, not caution. But the pay was substantial, and the job was clean. No digital trail, no direct contact, just a secure wire transfer and a cash drop. Dell and I had a simple rule. We don't refuse clean money unless the situation screams danger. This job was whispering, which was unsettling, but not loud enough to turn down. Dell was a decade older than me and had a lifetime of experience. He was ex-Army, a fact he never boasted about. He had a quiet, grim demeanor, as if he'd faced death multiple times. We'd been partners for nearly 4 years, mostly handling retrievals and high-risk security details. We never asked questions. That was our code. Asking questions makes you a part of the problem. This job, however, felt different from the beginning. The target, the kid, didn't seem to exist. No records, no identification, just a face and an age. The coordinates placed him in a hand-built A-frame cabin in the deep woods, a structure that didn't appear on any maps. Dell found some chatter on obscure survivalist forums. One post read, "It's not just wild, it's wrong." Another described a pale figure walking naked through the trees, moving as if it had too many joints. Dell dismissed it as folklore. I hoped he was right, but I packed extra ammunition just in case. The road ended 6 miles from the coordinates, forcing us to hike the rest of the way. The terrain was steep and rugged. The forest grew denser, and an unnatural silence descended. There were no birds, no wind, just the crunch of our boots. By the end of the second day, we were exhausted. We made a cold, quiet camp and took turns on watch. At 3:17 a.m., I saw him. He was standing between 2 pine trees about 40 yards away, perfectly still. He seemed to have been there for a while. Then, he stepped backward and vanished into the darkness. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At dawn, we found the cabin. It was nestled in a hollow, almost perfectly camouflaged. The path to the door was swept clean. I set up with a tranquilizer rifle 50 yards away, while Dell circled to cover the other side. At 6:04 a.m., the door creaked open. The target stepped out. He was shirtless and shoeless, with long, stringy hair. His skin was so pale I could see the blue veins beneath it. His movements were unnatural, robotic. I fired. The dart hit him squarely below the collarbone. He didn't even flinch. He reached up, pulled the dart out as if it were a splinter, and looked directly at me. Through my scope, our eyes met. His were an unnatural synthetic green. Then he turned and went, back inside. Dell returned, asking if I had missed. "No," I said. "It was a clean hit." We waited 10 more minutes before approaching the cabin. Inside, it was sparse. A neatly made cot, a steaming cup of tea, and a pile of unlabeled bones on a shelf. The tranquilizer dart was placed on the floor next to the cot. The target was gone. Dell went outside to check the perimeter. I was about to follow when I heard him scream, a sound I had never heard from him before. I rushed out to find him sunk into the ground up to his waist, as if a sinkhole had opened beneath him. "Something has me," he yelled. "It's pulling me down." I grabbed him and pulled, but it was like fighting an invisible force. I heard a sickening snap from beneath the earth, and he was gone, pulled into the ground. I dropped to my knees and shone my flashlight into the hole. It spiraled down like a throat. Then I saw movement. Fingers, a shoulder, and then a face. It was the target, or what was left of him, crawling back up. His jaw was unhinged, his skin stretched tight over a shifting bone structure. He emitted a low, humming sound that seemed to absorb all other noise. I didn't hesitate. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my vision tunneled. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. It started on the second try. I drove for 13 hours straight. When I ran out of gas, I abandoned the truck and walked until I reached a main road. I paid a stranger to drive me across state lines. That night, I destroyed everything. My ID, my licenses, my SIM cards. I took a new name and disappeared. Next story. My building was undergoing a mandatory fumigation for bed bugs. The infestation was traced back to the residents of 3B, who'd picked up some contaminated furniture at a garage sale. We were told we had to vacate for 2 days. While most of my neighbors checked into hotels, my brother, Garrett, and his wife, Lynn, generously offered their place. "Just a heads up," Garrett mentioned as he came to get me. "You'll be in the loft. It's no 5-star hotel." He was not exaggerating. Their home was a classic split level from the 70s, and the loft was a converted attic space situated over the garage, accessible via a pull-down ladder in the hall. It had once been Garrett's office before he, like many others, transitioned to working from the kitchen. The room itself was passable, decently spacious with hardwood floors and built-in shelving. However, a bone-deep chill permeated the space, even for September. The insulation was practically non-existent, and a huge, 4-foot circular window dominated one wall, facing the backyard. It was a type of architectural flourish that prioritizes aesthetics over practicality. "And the window doesn't secure," Lynn explained with an apologetic smile, handing me a stack of blankets. "In fact, it doesn't even latch properly. Just prop something against it if it gets windy." The window swung outward on hinges, and true to her word, it opened with a gentle push. From there, I had a clear view of their backyard, a large garden Lynn frequently featured on her Instagram. A heavy wooden lattice, draped in ivy, scaled the back of the house, stopping just shy of the window. It appeared strong enough to support a person's weight, though the thought of why someone would climb it didn't cross my mind then. My nephews, 8-year-old Dustin and 6-year-old Cameron, were amused that Uncle Pete was staying in what they dubbed the treehouse. They helped me carry my air mattress and duffel bag up the ladder before Lynn ushered them away for bedtime. Their bedrooms were situated on the second floor, directly beneath the loft. That first night, I arranged my makeshift bed in the center of the room, directly under the angled ceiling. With my phone, a book, and a bottle of water, I settled in. It was surprisingly cozy, despite the cold. I could hear the faint, comforting sounds of the family below, the rush of water, the muffled dialogue from a TV, and the low murmur of the kids bickering. It was the soundtrack of a normal, happy home. Around midnight, I woke with the urgent need to use the restroom, a consequence of too much coffee at dinner. The house was now silent. Everyone was asleep. I descended the ladder as quietly as possible, trying to prevent it from creaking. After using the second-floor bathroom, I washed my hands and made my way back up. Upon re-entering the loft, I noticed my water bottle lay on its side near the window. I was certain I had left it standing upright next to my pillow. The window was also ajar by about 3 inches. I reasoned that I must have knocked the bottle over when I got up and hadn't noticed. Perhaps a shift in air pressure had caused the old window to swing open. I shut it and, for good measure, hung my backpack over the handles, hoping its weight would keep the window closed. Then, I returned to my air mattress. At approximately 3 a.m., a scratching sound roused me. It sounded like an animal foraging in the backyard, moving through Lynn's garden. Probably a possum. Garrett had mentioned they were a nuisance. The sound drew nearer to the house, followed by what I recognized as the scrape of claws on wood. Something was climbing the lattice. The ascent was slow and deliberate, not the rapid scramble of a raccoon. This sounded heavy. The lattice groaned under its weight. I lay there, eyes fixed on the dark circle of the window, half expecting a masked face to peer in. But nothing appeared. The climbing ceased just below the window. After a tense 30 seconds, the sounds of descent began. Whatever it was had seemingly changed its mind. I heard it move off through the garden, and then there was silence. I didn't get much sleep after that. The next morning at breakfast, I mentioned the animal noises. Lynn and Garrett shared a fleeting glance. "Oh, we get all sorts of creatures out here," Lynn said, her attention fixed on her scrambled eggs. "Mostly deer and possums." "Big ones," Garrett added. "Some of them are massive." Dustin started to say, "Tell him about the—" But Lynn cut him off. "Finish your cereal, sweetie. You'll be late for school." I spent the day away from the house, bouncing between coffee shops and the library, dreading my final night in the loft. When I returned after dinner, Garrett had placed a space heater in the room. "Thought it might be a bit chilly up here," he said. "One more night, and then you're back in your own bed." I nodded and thanked him. That night, exhaustion hit me hard. The combination of the previous night's lack of sleep and the warmth from the space heater made the loft feel much more inviting. I decided to move my air mattress to a corner, away from the window. If something climbed up to look in, it wouldn't see me immediately. I once again hung my backpack on the window handles, and, around 11:00 p.m., drifted off with a book in my hand. The sound that woke me this time wasn't scratching, it was breathing. Deep, resonant breaths, and they weren't coming from outside or below. They were in the loft with me. Without moving my head, I slowly opened my eyes. From my vantage point in the corner, I could make out most of the room in the faint glow of a distant street lamp. The large circular window was wide open. Something was crawling across the floor. It moved on all fours, but its gait was unlike any animal I had ever seen. Its limbs were unnaturally long, bending at odd angles. The creature was covered in dark fur. Its head was enormous, disproportionately large for its slender neck, and elongated in a way that churned my stomach. It sniffed quietly as it moved, its head low to the floor, as if tracking an invisible trail. When it reached the spot where I had slept the first night, it paused. It picked up my water bottle, not with a paw, but with something that looked disturbingly like a human hand, complete with a long, opposable thumb that ended in a thick, dark nail. The creature inspected the bottle, turning it over before setting it down gently. Then it continued its path toward the ladder opening. It reached the edge and peered down into the hallway below. The way its neck stretched as it looked down made me want to shut my eyes and convince myself it was a nightmare, but I was frozen, unable to look away. It studied the hallway, its head tilting from side to side. Then, it began to lower itself backward, its long fingers gripping the edge of the opening. The kids' rooms were down there. Dustin and Cameron were sleeping, and this thing was about to enter their hallway. I tried to scream, but only a terrified wheeze escaped. The creature's head snapped in my direction. I saw its face for the first time. It resembled a wolf's, but stretched and flattened. Its eyes, which reflected the dim light like a cat's, were locked on me. My voice finally returned, and I let out a raw, terrified scream. The thing moved with a speed that defied its size. It shot up onto two legs, its head cracking against the sloped ceiling. It emitted a sound, not a growl, not a screech, but a horrifying hybrid of the two that vibrated in my chest. It scrambled frantically toward the window, its long limbs flailing and knocking things over. It dove headfirst through the opening, and I heard the lattice groan and snap as it descended. By the time I reached the window, the backyard was still and empty. Garrett was up the ladder moments later, wielding a baseball bat, with Lynn close behind. I could hear the children crying downstairs, woken by my scream. I recounted everything, my words a jumbled mess. They didn't dismiss my story. Instead, Lynn's eyes filled with tears. "We've seen it 3 times, she confessed. "Always in the backyard, always after dark. We never thought it would climb the lattice. We didn't think it would try to come inside. We've been telling ourselves it was just some escaped exotic animal," Garrett added, his gaze fixed on the open window. "A sick bear, anything that made logical sense. We even called animal control, but they found nothing." He looked at me, his expression firm. Don't you dare let those kids think it was anything other than a big possum that scared you. They'll believe that, and they'll be fine. He looked at Lynn. I'm taking that lattice down tomorrow. She nodded eagerly. And we're getting bars for that window. All the windows, if we have to. They did more than that. They moved out the following week, telling friends and family it was for a better school district. In a way, it was for the kids. Before they left, Garrett confided in me that they had discovered deep scratch marks on the children's window screens.